Welcome back to the Kansas Deep Dive series on Tim's Vinyl Confessions. I'm Tim Derling, joined once again by Mr. Jeff Wagner. Hello, Jeff.
How you doing?
Thanks
Thanks for having
for
me.
thanks for sitting in with me again. We did the first episode talking about the Kansas debut album, and now very quickly things well, no pun intended, things progress. We get album number two, Song for America, 1975, one of my favorite album covers and one of my favorite logos ever for the first time appears. Um,
Yeah, that's the
so,
first appearance of the classic logo. There it is.
yeah, I love how they put the letters together. So, yeah, Jeff, your thoughts, like, the improvement, the even though it's only been a year or less than a year, what are your thoughts on the jump they make from the debut to this album?
Well, as we discussed on the first episode on the first album, I mean they came out pretty fully formed as a band. Um, they did improve or just tinker things a little bit with Song for America in the sense that like it all feels a little more even more unified. I don't think we don't have that cover song bringing it back. There's just a little bit more of a unity to the entire thing, and I think a grandiosity to the compositions that's just a little bit more what we now call proggier, for lack of a better word. So I think they're now exploring that side of themselves just a little bit more. I think they're finding that they're really engaged with this, kind of more exploratory approach to rock. And yeah, man, this is a great album. As you mentioned, the cover's fantastic. We get that Kansas logo that would morph and change throughout the years that they would use on 90% of their covers. Yeah, this is the one that started that. And man, I love this album. And I think there's it's a better production. It's a little bit fuller, a little bit more depth to the sounds of it. Yeah, they nailed it, man. They did not go through a second album slump here.
Definitely not. Although it has to be mentioned, if you only had the portable, you still didn't get to see the logo just yet. It
Ah,
just
look at
this
that.
bizarre sort of lettering here on the 8 track and the cassette.
Okay,
Although when
interesting.
when the CD came out, of course, they did the right thing
You wonder
and
about that choice, like why not on the 8 track and why on the original vinyl? It's just why not the
it's
logo?
it
Strange.
seems to be that cassettes and 8 tracks, when the record companies put them together, they took a lot of liberties, and I've never been too sure why. Like yeah, I've never been too sure why. Like, well, for another thing, they write the title on here too, and the title does not appear
On the
on the vinyl.
right. Yeah.
So it's just one of those things. But yeah, so this is the first time, I believe, this is the first time they work with Jeff Glixman. Yeah, because Wally
Yeah.
Gold produced the first album. This one is co-produced, and I think that has a lot to do with the tightening up of the sound. And Jeff he'd become the Kansas producer. I mean, let's face it. I mean, he's the one guy you associate with producing this band, even though they've worked with a lot of producers over the years, and they've worked with Jeff in recent years. So let's get
Absolutely.
into this track by track, Jeff. It's an interesting start to the album, not unlike the way that the first album starts, Down the Road.
Yeah, I was going to say the same thing. This is their "Can I Tell You?"
Yeah. This
This
is
is
almost like they're
another
writing their own version of Bringing It Back.
kinda. Yeah, I love this. I
Yeah.
love Down the Road. I think they kick the door down,
Yeah.
and you get some great Robbie Steinhardt vocal, man. He's so inspired with the vocal on this one, and of course he gets to rock the fiddle too. But man, yeah, if they're gonna start their records with a bang like this, keep them coming because Down the Road's a killer. I just think
Yeah.
we talked. It's not one of their proto metal ones. It's definitely hard rock. It's also a little bit. You could almost mistake it for what somewhere between ZZ Top and Allman Brothers and Leonard Skinner. It's
Yeah.
got a little bit of that vibe, which they would show that every now and then. I mean, they're
Yeah.
Midwestern band. I mean, it's um, sounds very American. Sounds very American
Very
rock.
much. Yeah. Especially
Uh,
they get doing the claps in the middle of it. And
yeah, yeah, got the hand claps. Wonderful
yeah.
thing. 3.5 minutes, man, and it kills. I love it. Great opening.
Yeah. And it became not a staple, but they did do it fairly often in their
Yeah.
sets.
Yep.
Even after Robbie left, I know that I'm pretty sure it's the last track on the Live at the Whiskey album. And I think when I saw them, they closed with it, with
Yeah.
Down the Road.
Yeah.
And then, of course, we get into the epic title song. I first heard this on the Best of Kansas, and I've said this before that this song, because I've been a Rush fan for years and years and years and years, and I'm relatively newer to Kansas, but this reminds me of Xanadu by Rush. Not that it sounds anything like it, but simply that it's a long song. It doesn't feel like a long song
Right.
because every part is perfect and in its place, and it just glides through. And by the time it gets to the end, you're like, "Oh, that's done. I want to hear it again." It's
Interesting.
amazing.
Yeah.
It's
They're about
amazing.
they're about the same lengths because this is 10 minutes and Xanadu is about 10
Little
minutes, right?
over. It's like 11 and change.
11 and change.
Yeah.
They unfold similarly too. Yeah, I had never made that comparison, but now that you mention it, I do think that they have a similar way that they unfold. That's hard to really unpack and like and describe. But now that you mention it, I can see that for sure.
Well,
You
and
said,
also the fact it's probably what, 3.5 minutes before you get to a vocal.
right, right. Yeah, a song for America, the song to me, it unfolds in a very theatrical, cinematic way. I could almost see parts of it being adopted for Broadway or something. I don't mean that in a
Yes.
bad way. I think they
No,
also had
yeah,
elements
I
of
hear
that on
that.
the Mask album. The next album had some songs that had that element, but yeah, they're not afraid to be grandiose and symphonic. And every now and then I've heard people say, "Oh, Kansas isn't prog." It's like, yeah, they are,
Yeah, they are.
because what is this song but progressive rock? I mean, it's
Yeah.
it's
There's
one of the
nothing
very
Southern rock about this. There's nothing boogie rock about it. It's prog. It's
yep,
pure prog.
yep, yep,
And
and it's beautiful. It's one of the most
the
beautiful
lyric
songs.
is great. And the interplay between Steve and Robbie is great. And I just marvel at the fact that Carrie wrote this song on a plane.
Yeah, right.
Who does
Uh,
that?
yeah, right, on a napkin or something.
Yeah. Like,
Yeah,
I've read, Paul Stanley said he wrote Love Gun on a plane. I love that song.
sure, I
This
do
is
too.
not the same type of song.
No, no, yeah, this is
It's a
right.
little more to
Love Gun's the
remember
kind of
here.
song you can write on a plane. Song for America doesn't seem like the kind of song you can write on a plane. It just
To
like who,
remember all
yeah,
those
like you say, who does
parts.
that?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a great one, and I know from having talked to enough Kansas fans, this is considered one of their very very best songs. Period. I mean, there's that
Yeah.
just has a lot of respect. It's top tier for a lot of fans. I know Thomas from Inside Out considers this maybe his favorite Kansas song. I know he thinks very highly of it.
It's a
Uh,
set list staple.
yeah,
I don't
yeah.
think they've ever not played it.
They have, yeah, and the later lineups, they haven't always tackled it, but it's been there, like
Yeah.
they'll bring it back like every other tour, I think. Uh, yeah.
So now we have Lamplight Symphony, which is almost as long at 8:11.
To me, and I don't mean this in a bad way, it feels longer. It just because I think there are more parts. There's a lot going on. It makes a lot of changes and left turns over here and a lot of different instrumentation packed into just over 8 minutes. This is another prog classic on the album. I think this is and this is one that they did bring back for either the Left Overture tour or the Left Overture tour. I think they started playing this, which was fantastic because it's just one of those that feels like it's an obscurity. They'll probably never touch that, but yeah, still a very very engaging song live, and yeah, ends the first side in grand fashion too.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it's interesting because um, I'm kind of still like, about 6 years old. I'm kind of a newbie when it comes to Yes. I'm a relatively new Yes fan. When I first listened to the Going for the One album and I heard Turn of the Century, it immediately made me think of this song.
Okay, I
It's a
can see
very
that.
similar lyric. It's a guy
Okay.
mourning the loss of his wife. It's not exactly the same, but I have to wonder if the established prog bands didn't have it, have their ear open to these American upstarts and think, that's not bad. I
You
know they've
wonder.
toured together at one time or
Oh,
another.
sure. Yeah, sure. Yeah, you wonder. You wonder. Um, yeah. I imagine, boy, yeah, it is funny to think about Yes and them sitting down with this and listening. I know that, and this is going to be less surprising than it would be of Yes, you know, digesting a Kansas album and taking a little bit from it. But Styx were really inspired by Kansas.
Yeah,
They toured together. It must have been around the Crystal Ball era.
yeah,
They toured with Kansas, and from that experience, and from Tommy Shaw especially being so impressed with Kansas, he wrote "Man in the Wilderness."
Yeah, I've heard him say he wanted to write a song that was sort of like Kansas.
Kansas, yeah. So I like that they were contemporaries, but one certainly was inspired by the other to write a song on. I mean, I consider Grand Illusion one of the very best of American prog. I mean, it's a masterpiece album, and I love that there's a little bit of that Kansas influence in there too.
And the thing to remember too is this is early days. We're still in 1975, and the most established of bands are only 5, 6 years. Yeah, they're that 5, 6 years ahead of, but they're not bands that have been around for 20 years at this point.
No, yeah, it's all pretty new and fresh.
And when you tour together with bands, I mean, this happened. I mean, look what happened when Kansas and Journey toured together. This is in Journey's prog days. Journey had "I'm Gonna Leave You," which has that section that is very much like "Carry On," the beginning section.
Yeah.
You feed on these things. Speaking of similarities, and it's not a musical one, but this was pointed out to me and it blew my mind. This album came out in February 1975, as did Rush's "Fly By Night." And picture the "Fly By Night" album cover, and then look at this. They both got these menacing looking birds on them.
Yep.
I never put that two and two together before. So yeah,
that's awesome.
So now we flip the record over, and we get the dirty, heavy blues of "Lonely Street."
Yeah, this is probably not my favorite. It's the only part of the album I can say I don't love. I think it's good for what it is. I think it's one of those songs that, like, I just stylistically, maybe it's just not my thing, because as you say, it's kind of like kind of bluesy shuffle to it.
Yet it's not in 4/4. It's a weird time.
Yeah,
it's like 11/8 or something.
I like it. I like it fine. It just never struck me as a highlight. So you'll have to maybe try to change my mind here on that.
Well, I'll tell you, Steve Walsh sings with abandon on this. I mean, he really belts it out. The first time I heard this song was, it's interesting because I got into them in 92. So Live at the Whiskey was quote unquote new at that time.
Yeah.
And at the end of that CD, they've got an old live version of "Lonely Street." I'd never heard it before. And I've always been intrigued by the song. It's very stark lyrically, like very, very plain spoken. And "Lonely Street" is not a place where you want to hang out. I think that there's some great guitar work on this song. But yeah, it is very different. It is interesting that they start both side one and side two start off with slightly more, dare I say, regular sounding rock songs than what would follow. And then the next song's interesting, "The Devil Game," because again, I hadn't got this album when I saw Kansas in concert in the spring of '94. I hadn't quite gotten all the albums, and somebody in the audience kept shouting "Devil Game" at me, and I didn't know what he was talking about. And then I heard this. I'm like, yeah, I kind of wish they played it. This is an epic.
Oh, I love it. Yeah,
it's a 5-minute epic, but it's still an epic, and it's heavy.
It's heavy. Yeah, this one marries kind of that proto metal that they have with the maybe not so much the proto metal, but it's certainly heavy with the proggy stuff. It's not like a expanded length. It's like you say, it's 5 minutes. It really kind of boils down everything about this album into one song. I think this is probably the song that they really, every element of "Song for America" is right here in this one particular piece.
Like a microcosm of the album.
Kind of, yeah. Whereas everything else is very specific. "In Commudro" is very prog, title track's very prog, "Down the Road's" very rock. This one kind of does everything. It is a great song. I might have been that annoying guy yelling that too in the crowd.
Yeah.
It's a good one. Yeah, and I don't know of the many times I've seen them. I don't think they've ever played it.
And this one it's interesting. This one was written by Steve Walsh and Dave Hope.
Yeah.
And Dave Hope is totally underrated as a bass player.
Completely. Well, I mean, this is a band of just 6 absolute top-notch talents. Every single guy. I mean, right down to Dave Hope. Excellent band with these intuitive players, just incredible tones, incredible sounds. Obviously, a great chemistry that lasted a long time. But yeah, I like also looking at their credits, because you can expect a lot of Livgren, of course. You can expect
Yeah.
some Walsh tunes, but every now and then the other guys would come in and get writing credits. And
And
I
put their
think
heads
that's interesting.
together and write something.
Yeah, I love that. I love that. I love when bands are truly um, cooperative in that writing sense. It's just, it's just going to give you more variety for one, a lot more character, a lot more color. Yeah.
Yeah. And like you mentioned, and lest anyone, again, the old argument, well, Kansas isn't really a prog band. In Comedro, Hymn to the Atman at 12:12. What else would you call this song?
Yeah,
This is pure. This is prog in the purest dictionary definition of it.
yeah, yeah. And like Belexis, it's also on this thing. It's one of the older tracks that they kept from those old days and finally made it to the second album. And it's got that little bit of eccentricity that you hear in that super early stuff. Well, it's right here in Incomudro. Another very complex song. I don't know that they've played this one live in recent days. Not since I've been going to see him live, but man, what a killer! I mean, just 12 minutes of just beautiful prog. It's so good, man, so good.
I just wouldn't you just love to be a fly on the wall at CBS when they first played this for them?
Yeah, yeah,
Here it is. Put a sleeve on it. Put it out.
yeah, yeah. Right. I know. One short year after the first album too. Um,
Yeah.
yeah. What can I say? Incomudro is really special. Yeah.
Yeah. So, Song for America, would you say this is like, it wouldn't surprise me to talk to a lot of people and have this as their favorite Kansas album. I think it's worthy of it.
Yeah, I wouldn't argue that either. It wouldn't be mine, but it's way up there. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
It's they have a yeah. There's too many great albums to really choose the
Yeah, they
one.
have a lot of high points and very few out and out duds. So, the more I listen to it, the more I see, yeah, this is worthy of being somebody's favorite. I mean, there's nothing.
Never would argue that with anybody who claimed it, because it's a killer, man. And you just holding up that album cover just makes me want to listen to it again, because look at that cover, so
and
good.
look how young these guys were.
Yeah, yeah.
On this back cover, here they are making this complex music, and you see that old footage of them doing Don Kirshner's rock concert, and Steve's hitting all the high notes, and everything is just right in its place. It's pretty amazing.
Yeah, in his prime, which was pretty much all the 70s,
Yeah.
he was just clear as a bell, just such a beautiful voice. I mean,
yeah,
he's rated, but I still don't think he gets I don't think he's rated to the level of, like, you talk about a Robert Plant or whoever you're going to these legends you're going to talk about. I think Steve Walsh should be talked about as a legend, just a pure vocal legend, the way Freddie Mercury is, or Robert Plant. I think Steve Walsh is so good. And the great part about that is Kansas was a band of a melting pot type band where, yeah, but he wasn't the only great vocalist. Robbie Steinhardt
exactly
was a killer vocalist. And so you got that sort of balance, like when Queen would use other vocalists, or any band who used different vocalists. The Beatles.
It was pretty common back then. I mean, Kiss and Journey did it. I loved it when Steve Perry and Greg Raleigh were in the band.
Yeah,
loved that interplay between the two of them. Not dissimilar to Kansas. You get the high tenor vocalist, then you get the guy with just the cool mid-range voice.
It's something I miss with newer bands,
Yeah.
It's funny. I was reading your Y&T book that we traded books recently, and I didn't realize, because I'm not the hugest Y&T fan, but I wanted to know all about them, and now I do, because I read that thing cover to cover. And I didn't know that every now and then Phil Kennemore would sing.
Not very often, like, especially more so in the early days. But yeah, Phil Kennemore occasionally Leonard Hayes took a lead.
Yeah, I love that, because I mean, they began in the 70s, so effectively they're a 70s band.
Yeah,
I feel like they took that tradition into the 80s, to not be afraid to give somebody else the mic every now and then, which is something that it got less and less common with hard rock and metal bands, even prog bands, quite honestly. And I miss that. I feel like I'd like to see more of that, but I mean.
I think that when the 80s came along, part of the reason is it was all about the front man.
Sure.
And so, I mean, if you look at the career, we'll go way off in another tangent. Look at the career of 38 Special. I mean, they essentially started as Donnie Van Zant's band,
right?
Coming out of the Skinner legacy. But by the time the mid 80s came along, they had pretty much had Don Barnes singing everything, because he was the one that had the radio friendly voice.
He did.
Yeah. It's very much a 70s thing. But I think in the 80s, it's like, no, it was one guy. We need one guy. Even take a band as well known as Kiss. from like 82 to 92, every single in between there was a Paul Stanley song.
Yep.
So you thought of him as, before I got into Kiss, I thought Paul sang everything.
Yeah.
I didn't know there were other singers in Kiss.
Sure. Yeah.
And
No, I know.
in the original band, all four of them sang.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
So
So
it's
it does
another.
seem to be something that came out of the 70s. I mean, even if you think of Deep Purple when they had Coverdale and Hughes, two completely different voices.
Yeah.
So, but yeah, Kansas were a really good example of that. And yeah, Robbie Steinhardt could have been a perfectly good lead singer on his own in another band.
Oh, totally. Yeah, I know.
Just
That's
that
that's
he
the
ended
scary
up,
part. He's the
yeah,
secondary vocalist and he's killer. You know, it's also why I bring up Rich Williams a lot because a lot of people want to talk about Kerry Livgren and what a great guitarist he is. He's a great guitarist, no question. Such respect for that guy. We wouldn't be here talking about this great
right.
music without Kerry Livgren. So props there. But Kerry played keyboards, Kerry wrote, but Rich to me was the face or the sound of Kansas guitar wise. To me, you
Yeah.
think about Kansas guitar tones, you're actually listening more to Rich
Well,
there.
he's the only constant guy. And to me, I put him in the same category as somebody like Brad Whitford from Aerosmith,
Oh yeah,
who never gets the credit he should because it's all
I
about Joe Perry, right? It's all
totally
about
agree.
Perry and Tyler, Toxic Twins. But Brad
Yeah,
is like the glue.
yeah, totally agree. And that's what I mean. Like you've got this band of like there's not in one focal point. Like every one of those guys could have been a focal point. I think Dave Hope
Yeah.
comes across a little less flashy, maybe, or a little less out front. But he's a fantastic bassist. Phil Ehart as well, monster drummer. Also doesn't get a lot of credit, but man, you listen through their entire catalog or see videos of them live in any era. I mean, he kills. He's such a great drummer. He's got such heavy hands, yet he's very tasty. It's hard to find that in a drummer, I think.
I think it's because all six of those guys and really everybody that's come through the band served the song so well is probably why they don't get recognized individually for their talents
Sure. Fair
because
enough.
they're just such a united force and you hear that
Yeah.
sound coming at you.
Yep.
So that's the deep dive for the second Kansas album, Song for America. We're not going very far because we're going to stay in the same year for the next one. But Jeff, thanks for sitting in with me on this one. Everybody get Jeff's Fates Warning book, Destination Onward. It's a great read. Check him out on the Radical Research podcast. And if you don't have it in your Kansas collection, I know it's another compilation, but it's worth picking up. Another Fork in the Road, 50 Years of Kansas, worth the price of admission alone for the remake of Can I Tell You? Did I miss anything, Jeff? What else have you got going on?
I don't think so. I got the Voivod book coming out. I mentioned that on our first episode. I'll mention it again. That should be out by the end of the year. So I've been working on that for a few years. Another deep passion project of mine, and I can't wait to put that out. I feel very honored that they allowed me to do it. Yeah, that's about what else I got going on. I have another book in the offing for next year. It'll be more of a collaboration, not really a ghostwriting thing, but a collaboration with an artist. I can't announce that yet, but I'll probably just keep punishing myself by writing books and the headaches it involves because I don't know. Now that I've got it under my skin, I just can't stop.
I find that you perceive a deficit. Here's a band that doesn't have a book on them. We need to do something about that.
Yeah,
And
get it on the shelf. I mean, it's why
yeah,
people create obviously music is they want that music that they don't have access to listen to otherwise. They want to create that music they want to hear. You and I are creating books we want to see on the shelves as fans. I mean, it's as
yeah.
simple as that. So yeah, gonna keep plugging away. Thanks a lot for
Perfect.
having me. This is fun, man. I can talk Kansas for years. So
Awesome.
I
Thanks a
appreciate it.
lot, Jeff. And thanks everybody for watching this edition of the Kansas Deep Dive on Tim's Vinyl Confessions. And go listen to some Kansas.